Today, we're going to talk about the reality of gear reviews on photography YouTube channels. So gear reviews on YouTube, are they something you can trust, or are they just a bunch of content creators trying to shill some products so you'll click on their affiliate links or something like that? Now, I'm probably the minority here, but I do consume a lot of photography gear reviews on YouTube, and I think if you approach them with the right way, keep the right things in mind, and think about where the content creator is coming from, you can still get some useful information from them if you're considering a piece of gear to get and whether you should get it or not. So first, I want to talk a little bit about how I consume gear reviews on YouTube, and then a little bit about how I approach them as a content creator when I'm reviewing a piece of gear. So with that, let's get to it. Let's talk about how I consume photography gear reviews on YouTube. When I'm looking for a new piece of gear, especially when I was newer to landscape photography and sort of making the switch from portrait photography to landscape photography, I started looking at camera bags, what kind of tripod should I be taking out, was my camera good enough, all of that kind of stuff. And I watched a lot of YouTube videos on gear. It's just sort of what you do. And I think it can be valuable as long as you keep a few things in mind. And one of the things to keep in mind is to be aware that content creator may have received that product from the vendor for free, substantial discount, or just as a sample. And they may be wanting you to click through affiliate links down in the description below, and it does help the creator to do that. And because of that, maybe they talk a little more favorably about a piece of gear than they might have otherwise, because they want you to sort of click through. With that said, I still think it's a great opportunity to sort of see the gear. They're going to do B-roll of it, they're going to pick it up. Hopefully they'll have taken it out and actually used it, and they'll provide some feedback on it. And while I probably wouldn't trust just one video, I find if you watch several videos on a piece of gear, you can usually piece together some recurring themes. You can see that there's certain things that all of these people tended to say good things about. Maybe they like this one particular feature, and if they all said something positive about it, that's probably something that is likely to be true. Likewise, if you're watching these videos and they all comment on something, maybe they comment on something's too heavy or something's in an awkward position, and several of them comment on that, it's probably true that it's an awkward position and that it could impact your decision to buy. So I think as you watch several videos, you can sort of piece together what's working well and what isn't. And just because someone says something good about it, just think about it critically from your mind, and maybe something that someone says is good isn't something that is necessarily a match for you. For me, probably a good example is the Nikon Z8. There's a lot of videos out there about the Z8, and there's a lot of great things about it. But when they go show the size, sometimes they'll even do comparisons to the Z7 II or something like that. I can see it's bigger than I would want it to be. We've all heard me comment on it in my videos about Nikon and where I want to see them go, or what a Nikon Z3 would look like. But if you keep those things in mind and think about it critically as you watch, there may be something a content creator is talking about that yeah, they might be saying that's a positive, but for you it's not. Or maybe it's a positive and it just wouldn't impact your photography. So I do think there's a lot that you can piece together about a piece of gear you might be considering by watching YouTube videos. Again, just be wary. There's a chance the content creator received the product for free and is trying to get you to click through or not damage a relationship with a vendor so that they can get more free gear in the future. That is certainly a reasonable thought to have in the back of your mind, but I don't think it makes watching gear videos to try to make a choice completely obsolete. Now, another thing to consider is even if a photographer didn't get the gear for free and they paid for it with their own money, I do feel like there's an element of confirmation bias that comes into play. What is that? Well, let's see. A lot of the stuff I review, I did pay for with my own money. All my Nikon cameras, which I talk relatively favorably about in most cases, I bought my own money. My camera bags, I have 2 Shimoto bags. I bought them both with my own money. My FLM tripods, I bought both of those with my own money. And there's a certain element of confirmation bias that goes into that. In each one of those cases, I researched my gear. What do I want to go with? What do I want to buy? And what do I want to use? I did lots of research. That research included reading online articles, included watching videos like I've described here. But when a person does that and they finally decide on what to get, they want to feel like they made the right decision. So when they talk about that gear, they tend to talk about it in a more favorable light because you wouldn't do something stupid and buy the wrong type of gear or regret your choice. So in cases like that, I think you will start to hear a more positive take on something because of that confirmation bias. Again, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just be aware that confirmation bias exists. So when you're watching that video, think about it critically. What are they highlighting that looks good? Do you think that looks good? Maybe that thing that looks good isn't. What are they talking about negatively? What are they saying this could be improved? Is that a big deal to you? Yes or no? And then it should help influence your decision. So that's sort of how I approach gear reviews on YouTube. I still research them. I still look at them whenever I'm considering some new piece of photography gear. So I do think photography gear reviews on YouTube can be useful if you're trying to consider whether you should buy a new piece of gear or something like that. Just approach it with a little bit of skepticism. Be aware of where a person might be coming in from, what their biases are. Think about what they're telling you with a little bit of critical thinking so that you're, realizing that they might be putting a slightly more positive light on it. But with that said, it's still a great way to see the specs. How does it look? How does it perform in the field? Like I said earlier, hopefully these photographers are going out and using the gear, and that experience of theirs in the field can be informative and useful. So that's how I consume gear reviews on YouTube. A little bit of skepticism, but I still find them extremely helpful. So how about me as a content creator that does produce gear reviews on this channel? Now I sort of frame mine a lot of times. I try to avoid the super in-depth technical gear reviews and a little more what's the hands-on like. But let's start first, gear that I've purchased. Really, a lot of my approach to gear reviews is informed by how I like to consume photography gear reviews and how I consider them. So let's talk about the things I buy with my own money. Mentioned it before, Nikon cameras, Shimoto camera bags, FLM tripods, even a lot of my filter choices are things that I paid for with my own money. And I don't think I'm immune to confirmation bias either. I want to feel like what I spent my money on is good, right? But I do try to point out the things that I think could be improved with things. I've done Nikon camera videos, lots of them, on things I think that could be better, things I'd like to see with the Nikon Z7 II, why I don't think the Nikon Z8 is a great choice for a landscape photographer, and so on and so on. With the camera bags, I've talked about them in various ways, things that work well for me, things that don't quite work well for me. I try to do that with all of my gear reviews. I will talk about what's been working well for me and talk about the things that I think can be improved. There's very few products out there that couldn't have some form of improvement. Sometimes it's substantial, sometimes it's just small little nitpicks and little upgrades that, hey, if they were considering it or watching these videos, I would like to see. So one of the things I lean towards in my gear reviews is I sort of lean a little away from the super in-depth technical. There are so many YouTubers out there that do a better job at reciting every single spec and doing every single comparison from one camera to the other in the same line, or even one camera to another brand. I try to focus my reviews and when I talk about gear a little more on how it has worked for me and how does it work in the field. And that's sort of how I do it. And with that in mind, I will sometimes do an unboxing video. I used to do a lot more of them earlier in my channel. And as I've been doing this a little longer, the unboxing videos, they're just not that exciting. Really, I might still do one here or there if it's something brand new or something really unique. But for the most part, I don't do a lot of unboxing videos. So if I do get something new, what I try to do is I try to get some time with it first before I even start commenting on it. For me, I will title a lot of my things called First Look. It usually means I've only used it for 3 or 4 weeks, maybe a couple outings, just enough to get some initial impressions. So my first look could be named First Impressions video, because I do think it's important, and where I can offer some value is how is it working for me in the field? Does it work well? Does it not work well? Subscribers probably already know if my style is sort of similar to yours, not similar to yours, are we on the same wavelength? So I think that kind of critique on something I get my hands on can be useful. With that said, and I even mentioned this in my long-term Maven filters review, is those really long-term reviews I think are super valuable and really can apply. So like this Nikon Z7 II, how's it doing for me after, I don't know, 3 years of use or something like that? That can be valuable. My camera bags, I've been carrying Shimoto bags now for 3 years now. Long-term reviews on that can be super helpful to someone considering a camera bag. They've probably got the specs of the camera bag memorized better than me, but they don't have the experience of using that gear. Same with filters, same with tripods, same with tripod heads, ball heads, geared heads. I can do a first look, give you initial impressions of using it, but what I think can be really valuable is those longer term in the field, how does it work? So that's how I approach my gear reviews. Like I said, not going to say I don't have some bias here and there, even when it's something about my own money, but I think there's value to seeing the gear and in hearing how it's worked for me. Plus, there's always the comments below where you can ask me questions about it, and I'll happily answer anything I can. Okay, so let's talk about when a vendor offers to send me a piece of gear to review. What do I do? Well, I actually go through a bit of a decision matrix to decide if it's something I'm interested in and whether I want to talk about it on the channel or not. And that sort of starts with, is it a piece of gear that would either help solve a problem I am experiencing or a piece of gear that I think is useful for a viewer of the channel? And what do I mean by that? Well, while I'm pretty set on my gear, I'm pretty set on my camera brand, my camera bag brand, my tripod brand, my filter brand, I get that not everyone is going to use the same brand that I use, and that me sharing some of my information about what another brand is doing, either poorly or doing very well, could be useful. You might want to hear, you might know I carry Shimoto bags all the time. What do I think about another camera bag? because I might have positive things to say about it. It might not be enough to switch me away from who I'm currently using now, but you might be interested in a particular sized bag, a particular brand, or a particular layout. And so I like to think that my input might be helpful. Does it work for me? Does it work out in the field? So I would consider something like that, because I realize not everybody's using the same brand stuff as me. Sometimes there's a budget consideration too. I tend to buy things that are probably wouldn't be considered budget in most cases. I don't buy super top of the line. I find myself, I'm sort of in that middle ground where I try to find the right mix of, I will pay for good quality, but without necessarily wanting to pay for the full brand, full name of the brand, something like that. So there's times I will look at other pieces of gear just because it might fit a budget. And I realize my viewers aren't all in the same budget place I am. Some probably want to spend more money than I spend. Some want to spend right about where I'm at. And some just want to spend less money and get something that at least works for them. So I will consider things that sort of fall around in those different budget areas. Even though it's not something I might use every day, I can at least provide input on whether I think it's a decent value for the money. With that in mind, I get a lot of things about tripods. Can we send you this tripod? Some of these tripods are very, very inexpensive to the point that I'm like, I really don't think I can say anything nice about this tripod. And I get it. I'm looking at based off of specs, do a little bit of research on the company. And so in those cases, I'll turn it down because I just don't feel like it's probably going to be something I can talk about. Like I said, there's some tripods that are a little more expensive that, they just might solve a need for that, that stage. I give the advice about tripods, buy once, cry once. And I know no one's going to follow that because I have way too many tripods because I did the same thing everyone else does. Buy a cheap tripod because I'm not sure I like this. Let me start cheap. Realize it's not good enough. Buy a slightly more expensive tripod. Realize I still didn't spend enough money on something before I start getting into a tripod that actually is capable and will last me a long time. So I realized people are going to start with some of these more inexpensive tripods. And there's some decent ones out there. I've got a Mi Photo tripod floating around. That's what I'm recording this video on. That was not super expensive. I still use it today. It's heavy, but it's a really quality tripod. I really like it. And there's other brands out there like that. So I will entertain doing a video on one of those types of tripods because maybe it will solve a problem. Maybe it'll really help out and hit that price point someone's looking for, even though it might not be the price point I'm at. So that's sort of how I go through it. Is it going to help solve a problem I have? In which case, yes, I'd like to try it and see if it solves a problem I have. Or is it something I think could solve a problem one of my viewers is having? Whether it be budget, different brand, or just to be able to compare different systems. So because of my screening process and the decision matrix I go through, I think that's why a lot of times when I do review gear, it's probably a decent chance I'm going to have at least some positive things to say about it. Might be priced really, really well. That makes it competitive with some of the cons. It might be overall a great little product with, a couple of negatives. It might be something that competes with something I'm already using, whether it be a lens, camera bag, tripod head, anything like that. So that's just sort of my approach. I always try to point out things I think could be improved, things I think it could do better, just so people can make their own decision. And that's it. I do think gear reviews on YouTube are helpful. I know I use them when I'm considering a new piece of gear or something like that. And I'm hoping that by me sharing how I approach a gear review on YouTube, that it can help factor into how you approach one on YouTube so that you're making smart gear buying choices, as well as how me as a content creator approaches gear reviews, because I think it's an interesting perspective for you, the viewer, to have so that you know where I'm coming from when I talk about gear on my channel. Anyways, I hope you found this video useful, and if you want to hear about 5 tips to improve your landscape photography that don't involve buying new gear, I'll put a video right here that you can go watch and learn how to improve your landscape photography that doesn't need you to buy new gear. Again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next video.